A lot of people use the same language. So you could have somebody that's justice oriented and somebody that is fundamentalist, rule keeping, bondage oriented, using the same language in their messages. And so I started not only calling out the theology, but also calling the names of the people who perpetuate the theology that I'm deconstructing to help people connect those dots. Well, Philip Anthony Mitchell, I was like, I ain't got to say nothing about him. And my thought was, because he just came on the scene, I'm not really going to have to address him. I've been addressing people like Jackie Hill Perry because she's been on the scene for so long. So a lot of people in this ministry have come through Jackie Hill Perry's ministry, have read her books and tried to apply her teachings to no avail, to the point where they felt disconnected from themselves and needed therapy and were feeling anxiety and depression and internalized self-loathing and all of these different things. So unpacking all of that is a lot. And then somebody who follows me heavily, like a big fan of my theological work, told me they were drawn to Philip Anthony Mitchell's church. And I was like, how? Like, what? Have you been listening? And I was like, okay, so I need to point out as well with him where the harmful theology is showing up. So we've been talking about that. I watched the whole message because I wanted to get the complete context, because I'm using the message as a case study for the book. So when I release the book, there will be a whole section breaking down this piece. And what's really important as we look at biblical interpretation is to understand the theological foundation that people build their messages on top of. That's why, again, why I say we cannot build a faith on sound bites. You cannot build a faith on sound bites. It is important to know the theological foundation that a person works from. It's important to know who influences the theology of the voices that you listen to. That's why I take so much time to explain how Jackie Hill Perry comes from the John Piper School of Theology. And that's not like an official school, but she comes through his teaching. John Piper is a part of the Christian nationalist movement that introduced the sin of empathy to us. Right? It's important to know the theological foundation, because a lot of times people use the same language. Let me show you where Philip Anthony Mitchell got his theological education from. He got his theological education from the school founded by this man. That's Rod Parsley, at an Evangelicals for Trump campaign in 2020, after the worst administration we had seen in our lifetimes. All right. So Philip Anthony Mitchell got a certificate of completion in advanced Sunday school from Valor Christian College, founded by Rod Parsley. So when you understand the theological foundation, it helps you to parse through what they're saying on the surface. Yeah, the average church going person, hold up, I'm gonna go run that back. The average church going person, you're not even thinking about people's theological standing because you're not encouraged to do so. Absolutely. We encourage you to do that here. Look into it, because I'm not at odds with all Christians. There's a whole lot of Christians that I really admire who I feel like are doing great work. Because I understand their theological foundation. So, oh yeah, and by the way, so you got Rod Parsley here, who's been the ops for a long time. At the same event, guess who else was there? Paula White, right? We talked a little bit about her a couple of weeks ago. So this is the theological foundation on which Philip Anthony Mitchell's sermons are built. It is it is colonized, it is anti-black, it is anti-intellectual. It is not concerned with real data or facts. Everything is, what does the Bible say? Because it's built on the idea of biblical authority, biblical inerrancy. So if you are heavily indoctrinated to believe that what the Bible says settles all matters, when people like Philip Anthony Mitchell come onto the scene talking about, I'm just talking about Bible, I'm just reading the Bible, I'm just reading the Bible, that will pull you in because you have not renegotiated your beliefs about biblical authority. When you are indoctrinated to believe that avoiding sin is the number one requirement for a Christian, when somebody comes onto the scene constantly talking about sin, that taps into your indoctrination. That's why I'm writing this book, so we can look out for these things. We can look out for binary thinking, sin consciousness, biblical inerrancy, spiritual bypassing. I want us to be able to see these things when they're at play in front of us. So when you see somebody like Philip Anthony Mitchell and he makes a good point like he did on Sunday about how parents should apologize to their kids, I agree with him on that. I don't disagree with anybody about everything. I agree parents should apologize to their kids. He made another point about how sometimes it's the people closest to you that do you the worst. It'd be your own family members. I agree. He had a whole segment in his sermon about discernment. You need to have discernment. I use the same language. So if you just listen to certain sound bites, you might think we agree on a lot of stuff. Okay. So let's get to the text, Romans 13:1. Philip Anthony Mitchell makes this statement that Black parents need to teach their kids to obey authority. He said, stop blaming white cops for the killing of Black kids. His words. And he proceeds to tell a story about him walking down Hollis in Queens at the age of 15. He saw an Italian cop driving past in a squad car, and he looked at the cop and locked eyes, and they made sustained eye contact. He said the cop swerved around, jumped out of his car, accosted him, pushed him up against a brick wall, put a Glock 19 to the back of his head, and said, say something. The moral of the story here was that y'all need to teach y'all kids to obey authority, because not all cops are bad. Some are, but not all of them are bad. He made absolutely no critique of the cop's action. Now, let's just take a step back, right? If somebody walked up to you, pushed you up against the wall, put a gun to your head, and dared you to say something, how would you characterize that encounter? What word would you use to describe that? Because to me, that sounds like terrorism. It's terrorism, it's brutality, it's immoral, it's everything you can think of. When he told the story, he had no critique of the police officer that put a gun to his head simply for looking him in the eye. Y'all, as Black people, there was a time we could get killed for looking a white person in the eye. And he's saying in his sermon that the moral of that story is that you just need to obey authority. No critique of the abuse of power. And he turns it on the Black people and says, stop blaming white cops for the killing of Black kids. And because He builds everything on the fundamentalist understanding of biblical inerrancy, biblical authority. He goes to the Bible to cement his point. Now, what I said earlier, here the Bible is sacred, not sovereign, right? So he talks about being terrorized by a police officer and then says, hey, you just need to submit. He is grooming people. He is grooming people to subject themselves to corrupt power so that whatever happens, whatever the government tells you to do, as long as they're not telling you to go against your Christianity, just do it. Just obey. If they put a gun to your head and dare you to say something, there's no need to critique the system that gave them the power to do that to you. Just obey. Just submit. And he goes to this text. All right, let's look at it. All right, so he says, let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those authorities that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists authority resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. All right, so I just wanted to establish that real quick. Verse 3 is where I want to hang my hat. It says, for rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Got a couple of questions right here. Who gets to determine good versus bad? That's number one. Who gets to determine what is good and what is bad? Because right now, we have a government that suggests diversity is bad, equity is bad, inclusion is bad, protesting genocide is bad, standing up for your rights is bad, anti-racism is bad, learning Black history is bad. That's the government that we're under right now. So who is making the definition of good and bad in our context? Because if you take a text out of its context, it is just a con. So who is defining good and bad in this situation? It's causation. And this is I'm like talking about it in the Greek. This was originally written in Greek. So when you go look at the Greek word study, that term there that is translated for could have also been translated as since or because. All right. So there's causation, meaning submit yourselves to governing authorities when they do right by you, is what he's saying. Submit to governing authorities because they're doing right by you. But what about when you have governing authorities who are shitting on you? This doesn't apply. How do you apply this when you are under rulers who are a terror to all of your conduct? Because again, Philip Anthony Mitchell told a story about him being terrorized as a 15-year-old for making eye contact with a white man. And then he goes to this passage to solidify his message. But there are other ways to interpret this. There are other ways to interpret this. It's submit to the people that do right by you. Now, when you're in a situation where your government is not doing right by you, then we need to have another conversation. And that's the conversation that we have here. We have that conversation here. How do you operate when the government is not doing right by you? So when I shared that I was going to do this, Kyle said, so Dr. Larry Wellborn argues that Romans 13:1-7 is a redaction ad because verse 8 flows as a complete thought from chapter 12. So Paul never said it. Now, this is a theory, right? I'm not telling you that you got to throw out Romans 13, 1 through 7. The passage that we just wrote, I'm not telling you got to throw it out. I'm just trying to show you how expansive biblical scholarship is. That sometimes we're reading passages that the original author didn't even say. I've preached a message where a whole verse was skipped in the passage. And I was like, y'all notice it's a whole verse gone right there? It's in your Bible. Like it skips from verse 36 to verse 38. This is a real thing. Like this isn't something that I'm making up. This is how biblical scholarship works. Depending on who you talk to, that's going to determine what theory you get about biblical scholarship. This thing is like much more expansive than what fundamentalist Christianity lets on. It's much more expansive than that. So when we're looking at these passages, I'm not saying like you need to take my interpretation as law. I'm saying I just gave you an interpretation. Philip Anthony Mitchell gave you an interpretation. Dr. Larry Wellborn said, "Hey, you could negate that from your memory because it was added by redactors." What comes right after that section about obey the governing authorities is what really blesses me because it just reinforces greatest commandment theology. Verse 8 of Romans 13 says, "Owe no one anything except to love one another." And here it is. "For the one who loves another has fulfilled the law." So the commandments, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet, and any other commandment are summed up in this word: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no wrong to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfilling of the law. So all of this legality that we hear from people like Philip Anthony Mitchell, that doesn't align with this. And that's why I hang my hat on greatest commandment. Love God with your heart, soul, mind, and your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself, which means you got to learn how to love yourself. You really got to learn how to love and honor yourself. If you're still here, hit the subscribe button and leave us a comment. Let us know what you think about the video. And if you want to see the entire recording, it's exclusively available in our Patreon. The link is in the show notes. You can either subscribe or you can just purchase this recording a la carte. We'll see you next time as we continue to deconstruct harmful theology and build beloved community. Peace out.